The part that got me was the realization that your ancestors looked at a clear midday sky and didn't describe it as blue, but as a blank, colorless void. You stare at a bright turquoise swimming pool. The water looks vibrantly, undeniably blue. If you traveled back 3,000 years, your own ancestors would look at that same water and call it green or black or nothing at all. The real answer is far stranger. The question of what did ancient humans actually see isn't about the hardware of your eyes, but the software of your culture. Does your brain create the world, or does the world create your brain? Your journey begins with a dusty book in a Victorian study. William Gladstone, a British scholar who would later become Prime Minister, spent years obsessing over the ancient Greek poems of Homer. He counted every single color reference in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Black appeared almost 200 times, and white appeared 100 times. Red was mentioned 15 times, and yellow and green less than 10. Why was blue missing entirely from the most famous stories in history? Homer described the Aegean Sea as wine dark. He described the oxen as wine dark. Even the sky was called bronze or iron, but never the shade of a summer afternoon. You might assume Homer was colorblind, a condition where the light-sensitive cells in the eye fail to distinguish certain hues. This theory falls apart when you look at other ancient texts. The Icelandic sagas, the Vedic hymns of India, and ancient Chinese folklore all share this strange omission. Is it possible that the color blue didn't exist for the human mind until very recently? Lazarus Geiger, a 19th-century philologist or a person who studies the history of language, followed Gladstone's trail. He looked for a pattern in how civilizations named the world around them. He discovered a universal sequence that every culture seems to follow as it develops. First, a language creates words for dark and light, or black and white. Then comes red, the color of blood and earth. After red, yellow, and green appear. Does it surprise you that blue is always the final color to join the list? Your brain is a master of efficiency. It doesn't waste energy processing information that has no practical use. In the ancient world, blue is remarkably rare in nature. You might see a blue jay's feather or a rare petal, but you cannot grasp the sky or the ocean in your hand. Most blue things in nature don't actually contain blue pigment, which is the physical substance that reflects specific light. If you cannot touch it, hunt it, or eat it, does your brain bother to give it a name? Consider the physical structure of your eye. You have millions of photoreceptors called cones. These tiny, peg-shaped cells sit in your retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of your eyeball. Most humans have 3 types of cones, one for long wavelengths like red, one for medium wavelengths like green, and one for short wavelengths like blue. This hardware hasn't changed significantly in tens of thousands of years. Your ancestors had the physical equipment to see blue, yet they lacked the mental category for it. Jules Davidoff, a psychologist, traveled to Namibia to test this theory with the Himba tribe. The Himba language has many specific words for different shades of green, but no distinct word for blue. Davidoff sat a participant down in the tall, yellow grass and showed them a computer screen. On the screen was a circle of 12 squares. 11 of them were clearly green, but one was a distinct, bright blue. Can you guess how the Himba reacted? They struggled to pick out the blue square. To your modern, English-speaking brain, the blue square jumps out like a fire alarm. For the Himba, the lack of a linguistic label acted like a filter over their vision. However, when Davidoff showed them a circle of green squares where one was just a slightly different shade of green, they spotted it instantly. You would likely find that task nearly impossible. Does your vocabulary act as a lens that brings certain parts of reality into focus while blurring others? This phenomenon is known as linguistic relativity, the idea that the language you speak shapes the way you perceive the physical world. It suggests that your brain doesn't just receive a live feed of the world like a camera. Instead, it interprets the data based on the concepts you have stored in your memory. Ancient humans lived in a world dominated by the browns of the earth, the greens of the forest, and the reds of fire and blood. Their visual world was a high-contrast map of survival. How much of the modern world are you currently failing to see because you lack the words for it? Imagine a hunter-gatherer standing on a limestone cliff at twilight. Their eyes are far more attuned to movement and low light than yours. They possess a higher density of rods, the rod-shaped cells in your retina that handle night vision and peripheral sight. In the dim purple light, they can see the slight rustle of a predator's fur against the tall grass. You would see only shadows and static. Was their version of reality more accurate than your own? The ancient eye was a tool for detection, not for aesthetic categorization. They didn't need to distinguish between teal and cyan to survive a winter. They needed to see the flicker fusion frequency, which is the speed at which your brain perceives individual flashes of light as a continuous image. A hunter might have had a faster visual processing speed. allowing them to see the world in a way that feels like slow motion to you. Their reality was one of sharp edges and sudden shifts in texture. The only ancient culture that developed a word for blue early on was the Egyptians. They were also the only culture that figured out how to manufacture blue dye. They ground up semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli into a fine, sparkling dust to paint the jewelry of the gods. Once you can hold a color in your hand, it becomes part of your internal map. You name it, you look for it, you see it everywhere. Is human progress just the act of naming the invisible? Gabriel Jordan, a researcher at Newcastle University, has spent years searching for tetrachromats. These are people with a rare genetic mutation that gives them a fourth type of cone in their eyes. While you see roughly 1 million colors, a tetrachromat might see 100 million. To them, a plain white wall is a swirling mosaic of subtle hues and shadows. One of these women described a grocery store as a chaotic, overwhelming explosion of color that felt like a physical weight. If she sees a world you cannot, who is seeing the true version of the grocery store? Your modern environment has fundamentally rewired your visual cortex, the part of your brain that processes images. You spend hours staring at glowing rectangles that emit concentrated blue light. This light hits your melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells, which are specialized sensors that tell your brain whether it is day or night. These cells regulate your circadian rhythm, the internal 24-hour clock that tells you when to sleep. By flooding your eyes with artificial blue light, you are essentially telling your brain that the sun never sets. Ancient humans lived by the rhythm of the campfire. Firelight sits at the opposite end of the spectrum, full of warm reds and oranges. This light doesn't suppress melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. When you sit in a dark room with your phone, you are experiencing a visual environment that is biologically impossible in nature. Your ancestors saw a world that faded into a deep, velvety blackness every evening. Can you even remember the last time you saw a sky that was truly pitch black? The contrast between your world and theirs is measurable in the shape of your eyes. Myopia, or nearsightedness, is exploding in the modern population. This happens when the eyeball grows too long, causing light to focus in front of the retina instead of on it. Your ancestors spent their days looking at the horizon, tracking animals across vast plains. Your eyes are locked onto objects just 20 inches from your face. Is the physical shape of your eye a record of your lifestyle? Researchers like Ian Morgan have found that the lack of natural sunlight is the primary driver of this change. Sunlight triggers the release of dopamine in the retina, which prevents the eye from growing too long during childhood. Ancient humans, living under the open sky, had eyes that were perfectly calibrated for distance. You have traded the ability to see a mountain range in sharp detail for the ability to read tiny text on a screen. Was this a fair trade? The way you see motion has also shifted. You are surrounded by high-definition video and rapid-fire editing that forces your brain to process visual information at an incredible pace. An ancient human might find a modern action movie physically sickening or impossible to follow. Their visual attention was focused on the salient details or the most important and noticeable features of a landscape. They saw the world as a series of meaningful signals, while you see it as a stream of constant data. Think about the wine-dark sea again. Homer wasn't just being poetic, he was describing the quality of the light and the mood of the water. To an ancient Greek, the sea felt like wine because of its deep, dark, intoxicating power. They didn't prioritize the hue but the texture and the feeling. Your modern obsession with color is a very specific, very recent way of organizing reality. You see a blue sky, they saw a shining, metallic dome. There is a study by the psychologist Alina Roche that looked at the Dani people of New Guinea. They only have 2 words for color: mola for bright colors and mili for dark colors. Despite this, they could still learn to categorize colors in a way similar to Westerners when asked to perform a task. This suggests that the capacity to see is universal, but the habit of seeing is cultural. Your brain is a muscle that has been trained to look for certain patterns since the day you were born. What does this mean for your daily life? Every time you look at a sunset, you are participating in a visual experience that is millions of years old, yet your interpretation of it is brand new. You see the oranges and purples as distinct categories, while your ancestors might have seen them as a single, shifting flow of brightness. You see a blue sky because your language has carved that concept out of the air for you. If you were born into a culture with 20 words for the color of the wind, would you start to see the air itself? The mechanism behind this is neuroplasticity, the ability of your brain to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. When you learn a new word for a visual detail, your brain actually becomes more sensitive to that detail. This is why an artist can see 20 different shades of gray in a shadow where you see only one. Your ancestors were visual artists of the natural world. They could read the health of a leaf or the age of a track with a single glance. You live in a world of symbols and artificial hues. Your brain is bombarded with neon signs, digital displays, and synthetic dyes that don't exist in the wild. This has created a visual overload that forces your brain to filter out most of what you see. You walk down a city street and ignore 90% of the visual data because it isn't relevant to your survival. An ancient human in that same street would be paralyzed by the sheer volume of new information. The physical hardware of your eye, the cones, the rods, the lenses, is a gift from your evolutionary past. It was designed to keep you alive in a world of predators and prey. But the world you actually see is a construction of your culture, your language, and your technology. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. Your eyes are windows, but your mind is the glass that colors the view. As you look around your room right now, try to find something you don't have a name for. It is almost impossible. Your internal dictionary has mapped out every inch of your environment, leaving no room for the unknown. Ancient humans lived in a world of wine-dark mysteries and bronze skies that defied simple labels. They saw a world that was raw, shifting, and deeply connected to their physical bodies. How much of that raw reality is still there, hiding just outside the borders of your vocabulary? The story of human vision is a story of narrowing down the infinite. You have traded a vast, nameless landscape for a neatly labeled map. You have traded the ability to see in the dark for the ability to see a billion colors on a screen. Both versions of sight are real, but neither is complete. You are a curious ape looking through a lens of your own making. You stare at a bright turquoise swimming pool. The water looks vibrantly, undeniably blue. If you can learn to see the world without the labels, you might find that the sky isn't blue at all, but something far more magnificent and terrifying. The part that stays with me is the idea that the most beautiful things in the world might be the ones you haven't named yet. What do you think you are missing simply because you don't have the word for it?